गुड इवनिंग एंड वेलकम टू गना शॉट। गना शॉट में आप सबका स्वागत है। आज हम देखेंगे समथिंग अबाउट द वेस्ट एशियन ओवरव्यू। एंड वेस्ट एशिया is in the news for all the wrong reasons, right? We have the Israel and Hamas war going on, right? You have problems in Lebanon, Hezbollah, Syria is under some kind of conflict always. And of course, Iran is in a minor turmoil at this point of time, all that. And something or the other is always happening. And then the Red Sea is in chaos. Right. It's my pleasure to invite Ambassador Anil Trigunayat, who's written this book, West Asian Dynamics and India's Strategic Imperative. He's written a book earlier called Evolving Security Dynamic in West Asia and India's Challenges. Today we'll invite him and request him to give us an overview on West Asia. Right. Sir, good evening and welcome to Gunner Shot.
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure.
And thanks a lot for accepting this invitation to present your book and talk about the West Asian dynamics. Give an overview of what's happening in West Asia. These days, a lot of people are more interested in the election scenario, but notwithstanding that, West Asia is close to us geographically and from many points of view. And at the outset, I don't have to reiterate the importance of West Asia. I'd like you to first introduce your book, and then we'll tell what motivated you to write a second book on West Asia and what have you covered, and then give us an overview. Over to you, sir.
Well, sir, thank you very much for considering to discuss this book. In fact, I've been associated with the region for nearly 2 decades in service. And since then, of course, this is one of the areas I continue to focus. It is fascinating and scary also at the same time. The kind of developments that they take place there all the time, it keeps you on tenterhooks. Yet one knows that it is the most important region for us. So I keep writing articles and discussions and speeches in different universities, colleges, and places. And so I was thinking that the shelf life of an article by itself is very limited. So one of these how academics, these and sort of a young publishing house, which approached me, and they said, "Sir, we would like to compile your articles only for West Asia, so that they're topical, and put them in some kind of sequence. And then, if you would agree, then we can publish it." I said, "That's a good idea because it can be then helpful for several people to see how in the past 2, 3 years, 4 years, things have evolved. And it will also provide them some kind of an overview, especially for a large number of students who are aspiring for civil services, or for that matter, there are youngsters who are international relations enthusiasts. So they can have some idea about this little more from a practitioner's perspective, more importantly, not necessarily in a very academic manner, which they already do in different areas and in their institutions." And so we collected about 55, 56 articles and speeches included. So in this book, basically, after collating all these different areas, different challenges, different evolutions of policies, the kind of situation that is emerging in the region, and it is generally said to be the most volatile region. But is it going to be stable ever? How it can be stable? Or it is moving towards certain kind of a stability despite these geopolitical, geo-economic, geo-religious, and geo-strategic and geotechnological challenges that are happening. We are seeing how the global order remains in flux. New equations are being made all the time, and we are seeing that they are all going to impact every region. And from our perspective, India, I always say that it is even more important than our immediate uh, neighbors
Neighborhood.
in many ways. For the simple reason that we depend on our energy security on the region. We depend for our welfare of our diaspora there, which is about 9.5 million people who are sending about $50 billion a year, which is nearly one tenth of the foreign exchange that we have, or the 12th. And more importantly, the sea trade, sea routes which are there through these choke points. And that's why the new connectivity corridors and all are being worked out. So I thought that this is a good idea. So this book basically, those 50 articles have been converted into several sections and put under various themes. But the most important part of this book was, in my view, is that I requested one of my ex-bosses, with whom I have served in the foreign ministry three times, the former foreign secretary, Ambassador Raghunath, K. Raghunath, who now lives in Indore. And I requested him that if he would like to have a look at it, because frankly, under him, I learnt the first ropes. And I was very fortunate to be posted under two very important foreign service officers. One was Ambassador Chris Srinivasan, who was also the first Secretary West and then Foreign Secretary. And when I, in 1992, when I came back, I was going from Mongolia to New York, and I got stuck in Delhi for about 13 months. And that time I went to him thinking that I'll request him to expedite my departure to New York, because I was living with two suitcases only in transit. And I went to him, and he told me, like a real professional, he liked me a lot. He was my boss in Dhaka. And he said, Anil, no, I want you to join the Wana division in the ministry. Uh, so, I mean, I went to get some help, and I thought that this is, but least I did not, I know that this is going to be an area in which I would remain invested for a long time. And that's when we saw that the India was considering, it was a very moving time of Oslo Accords and all that was happening. And that's when we upgraded our ties with Israel to make full diplomatic relations in 1992. And I happened to meet a couple of times Mr. Arafat, Yasser Arafat. And he used to come, and he was most welcome in India. And when we broached it with him that, this is what we are trying to do, and his words were that I'm very happy that our friends and brothers like India, you are doing it, because then you can put some sense into our Israeli friends. So this is the kind of thing that happens that really, gives you a kick to work more. And finally, I somehow remained invested. I was Joint Secretary Gulf and Hajj divisions in the ministry. And then I served as ambassador to Libya and Malta and Jordan. And in all these places, the Middle East, even when I was deputy chief of mission in Moscow, that time Libya was being invaded, and I was working with the Russians, discussing with them what was happening, because we did not have any access. Our embassy had closed there. So through the Russians, I was able to find what was happening on ground. So it was like a continuous interest that continued to pay off until I retired from Jordan. So my Ambassador Raghunath, he said, look, I'll take some time, and I'm old and it won't be that easy for me. I said, sir, I've learned you have to do that. And you will be surprised, sir, if you see this. He has written about nearly 23, 24 pages as not only some kind of a forward, but also as an overview of the situation as he saw. And I thought that that was an amazing thing that he did, and a great contribution to this book from my perspective.
That's very fascinating how you got into this book and how the whole thing has come about. That's great. Now, you used the word fascinating and scary about this area. So let's, you tell us what's fascinating about this area and what's scary about this area in the current setup. So that will start the whole thing. And if you want a map, there's a map available.
Yes. You see, the fascinating, why I say fascinating is because there are layers and the layers. But the most important thing that I found in dealing with the people there is that once you develop that personal rapport, then your all cultural, civilizational connect, which had been disconnected for some time because of various policy parameters, we found that they just came back like normally. So when you went there, for example, to any country, when they think you are from India, they immediately look at you with a affection, so to say. So I remember that when I met late Sushma Swaraj, who was our minister, and I wanted to invite her because when I was going to Jordan, you'll be surprised, sir, that I went there in 2014, and we had 65 years of diplomatic relations, during which none of the prime ministers, none of the presidents had visited the place, and nothing was working in any way. The reason is one tried to find that uh, the impression in Delhi was that they were close to Pakistan, so they will not listen to us. But that's the problem. In whole of the Gulf and the Middle East, we had virtually given up to a great extent, thinking that they are closer to Pakistan, without really trying to wean them away if that was the case. So I thought that this was such an interesting phenomenon that we need to work. Likewise, when I came to Delhi from Nigeria and took over as joint secretary in the ministry in the Gulf division and the Hajj, there again I got to travel to all the regions. But there again I found that, can you imagine, after 1982, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, we did not have the visits to the regions, which is just 2.5, 3 hours away. So when I went to Mrs. Sushma Swaraj, I told her, I said, ma'am, the only thing I would like to say and submit to you is that when we go to these countries, you should just pick up the phone, go and meet your counterpart, have a cup of coffee with them, like these European Union leaders do on the meet on the border on a cafe and discuss the issues without any agenda, without any agreements, because everything else follows once that trust is developed. And I'm very happy to see, while during my time with the previous prime minister, we tried to do visits which were very significant to three, four countries, and I took nearly to all. Somewhere vice president, somewhere some others, to try to revive that way that a very big uh, deficit that existed. And then we, of course, Prime Minister Modi, when he came there, that time we were really very happy that we saw the kind of initiatives he has taken. He has, you can imagine that he has been 7 times to UAE, unprecedented. He has been to all countries, major countries. We have had developed from transactional relationship, which was simply like you have people there, they are working, they're sending money, you want to oil, you pay for it. But there was no strategic dimension that was there. I can just quote you an example. For example, in Delhi, we learnt that there were some of these wanted terrorist type of people were in an X place in Sharjah. And then we tried to tell our friends that, we would like to get them, and they were tipped off, they left, instead
Okay.
of capturing them. But today the situation is very different. Today, when we ask them, they are the fastest to return those people to us, those troubling guys. So that's the great difference in the relationship that has come, and dealing with these kind of issues and with these people. And I have tremendously good and important relationships, and when you meet with them, you talk to them, you understand that they also want to deepen ties with India. And another thing I found is that somehow, I don't know if it is willful neglect or what, that they were not even aware of the fact that we are the third largest Muslim nation in the world.
Oh,
Imagine, I mean, so that's
that's
why Pakistan goes saying, oh, we are the Islamic country, Islamic brothers, this and that, all kinds of things. But when I started telling them how many vice presidents, president, chiefs, and this intelligence heads and all that we had from India, apart from the three top actors who are Muslims, I said they really just don't, they couldn't relate it with India. But that is something that was, in my view, was important, and tried to tell them. And that's why there comes the question of sensitivities of each other's interests and each other's concerns. And this has really grown up in the last few years, and which is what I find fascinating. It is scary in the senses because there are these lot of contestations within the region. It has the maximum number of hotspots. The Libya you mentioned, about Syria, you mentioned about Yemen, and you have Iraq is still, Lebanon is still nursing its own. There were Arab Spring in 2010-11, and I was in Libya at the time. I mean, it has changed the whole complex of the region. The regimes were scared. Somehow, Gulf countries were able to stabilize while others had to lose their leadership, which was being in cause for more than 30 years, 40 years, and they were autocratic. And so, therefore, they had to go. For us, now imagine that yesterday only the Libyan deputy minister of political affairs was in India, and they came to us and they said that we would like to government of India, that we would like Indian oil companies to come back and start operations and Indian companies to come and complete the projects. Now, I was there also during the war period, basically. But even during that war period, what we did was, because earlier we had a very bad public perception about India because of our UN Security Council vote, where we had abstained and we were not in favor of the country being bombed by NATO. So the Americans used it as a major thing against us, that we were with Gaddafi. So it created a lot of a groundswell of, I would say, negativity against India, to the hostility rather. And many of our companies lost billions of dollars worth of things in that place. But at that time, I went there, and somehow we in Delhi were not aware about these things. It's only one I realized when I reached there. So my basic job became to somehow bring that negativity to a level of zero, so that at least it neutralizes, and then build from there. And that's when I got my Indian companies at my risk to bring them and to complete the projects. And that's what created such a tremendous goodwill in that place once again, that they start looking. This is unfortunate that they are going through this internal warfare between them, and civil war, sort of different east and west and all that. And that is what happens whenever the external powers intervene militarily.
Intervene, yeah, yeah,
Every
yeah.
country we are there, so they are working like that. So it's very difficult. But even in that process, India can continue to maintain its relationships at a strong manner. So I think that that's another thing. Syria, Iraq, what happened. So everywhere, so they can now. We have seen what happened in Israel and Hamas. It has not gone on. It's going on 240 odd days, 8 months, and we are seeing it worse and worse is happening. In this, again, India is called out to take some stance and position, and that's why it is scary in the sense is that, suppose you had this Iran-Israel conflict which somehow subsided. If it happens one way or the other, we have seen what Houthis did in the Red Sea, and still it has impacted a great deal. The whole of and our trade comes 80% from there only. So it has a direct impact on you. And suppose there is a war takes place, then what do we do with these 9.5 million people who are there? Who are your responsibility? How do we evacuate them? So that's a scary prospect, sir.
Right. Now that you outlined given the overview of West Asia, and what are the opportunities there, and what are the dangers of the situation, I'd request I'll get the map back. You give us, go from one end to the other, all the countries. If you could tell us what are the dynamics in each of these countries, what's happening. Spend a couple of minutes on each of these countries, because by now everyone knows what's happening in Israel and Hamas. Everyone knows what's happening in Iran with the death of the president. But very few know what's happening in Iraq. Very few know what's happening within Syria, or for that matter, what's happening in Jordan, right? But these are all important things which are happening, right? And so, for that matter, Lebanon, what's happening in Lebanon? So, I'd request you with the map. We'll go over country by country, and spend and highlight what are the important aspects of each country.
Sure.
The map is up.
So let us, I would say, let us start with you want me to talk about the conflict places or the
Yeah,
normal
anything.
countries?
You can go. I would request you to just scan from one end to the
Okay.
other, all those 8, 9 countries there which are important, and then touch
Yeah.
a little about the conflicts.
Well, let's start with Syria now, in the first
Yeah.
place. Syria is part of the Levant, and Syria has problems with Turkey. Syria had problems with other Arab countries. And it was a direct impact of what happened during the Arab Spring in Libya. Because I saw myself that from Libyans, through Libya, the Americans and others were trying to create problem and dislodge Assad. So the idea was that all these autocrats need to be removed. And in Libya, this although there was a discontent against the regime, but at the same time, it was also the revolution was also engineered and supported from outside by the Western countries. And thereafter, once Libya was settled for them, in their sense of the term, they started pumping in arms ammunition from Libya. And a country like Libya, which had just come out of this problem, also committed about $20 million a year to the Free Syrian Army against Assad. And at that time, we saw that the Russians had lost in Libya. Now they have regained there. The Russians had lost in this game, the geopolitical game in Libya, but they were very quick on uptake, and they saw that they have to protect Assad regime in Syria. And therefore, we saw in 2015, the Russians came in and they have propped up this regime all through, and now it is virtually stabilized. Iran has also been a major factor in playing in Syria. On the other hand, what we saw in from the countries like Qatar, the UAE, the Saudi Arabia, they were all used by the Western countries to work with them to dislodge these major regimes. And that's what one had noticed. So these countries, basically like Turkey, also in a way weaponize their foreign policy, I would say. And today, I mean, you can see, again, the case of Libya, I can give you what has happened. There are two governments, and there are two parliaments, and there are two heads of states and everything. Now, one of them is supported, let's say, on the eastern side, it is the General Haftar is there. Now, he is being supported by the Russians, by British, by the Americans, by French. On the other hand, you have the West, Libya, Tripoli and all, where you have, they are supported by Turkey. Then there are Qatar, which is, here it is UAE and Saudi Arabia. Here it is, you have Qatar, which is supporting them. You have Italy, which is supporting this regime here. So you have the Europeans, you have the Americans, you have everybody who somebody is supporting one militia group or the other, or one major group or the other, one of the two governments. Now, this is not going to resolve. That's the reason. And they came to really near at a war a couple of years back when Haftar wanted to forcibly take over Tripoli. So this is the kind of situation. Now, here again in Syria, that is very similar kind of a situation is happening. But gradually, we have seen that Assad has been able to put under control. He even held those elections, even though the Western countries won't agree with that. But he is in power, and Russians are supporting him. Iranians are also supporting him to a great extent, and they have been able to manage. Now, just let us look at Iran briefly. Now, Iran is a very major power in the region. It is run by the mullahs, ayatollahs, and it has Shia brand of Islam, which takes the leadership of. And it had problems with the Saudis. Saudis are, as you know, the King Salman now, or the Saudi king, is the custodian of two holy mosques and is considered as the leader of the Islamic world in that sense. So that kind of a geo-religious contestation between these two has been going on, which fortunately has subsided to a great extent after the Chinese and the Omanis and the Iraqis brought about certain rapprochement between them, and diplomatic relations have moved forward. And I hear that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman may visit Iran so soon. Now, the what is happening, the most fascinating that is happening in these oil-rich economies is they are trying to diversify away from the oil. They are all trying to go into renewables, go into more technology, more the tourism and others. So the kind of reforms and changes that are taking place in Saudi Arabia is mind-boggling. In 2008, when I went first time, I saw there was this morality police on the roads. Today, there is no morality police. First thing this Mohammed bin Salman did was quash them completely. So today, women are free. They go anywhere. They can go. Even for the first time, they went to do the Hajj by themselves without having any male companion or permission from anyone. So that is something that is exceptional that is happening in that. So they're utilizing the 50% of their population, which was earlier kept behind the scene, to become the part of the economic activity. And I have met the brilliant, very sharp ladies who are really go-getters in the country. Likewise, in the UAE, which is not a religious leader, So they have come out with a very new kind of a phenomena, and that is they are creating World Tolerance Summit. They have, the India also, Prime Minister Modi got this land, and we made this very fabulous temple in
Temple.
Abu Dhabi. So Pope had come there. They are doing these religious summit, try to project themselves as a country which has no problem policy and wants to get along with everyone. So that is something that is happening. But they, of course, as a middle power, they also have their ambitions. Then we come to Lebanon. Lebanon, as you know, has unfortunately also uh, is the home for Hezbollah, which is the a Shia group supported by Iran and one of the most powerful armies that any of these non-state actors have. But it is a kind of an state actor because without its permission or participation, they can't even form a government. Now, in this country, wherever we have this problem of confession based governments, where the power is divided because the president would belong to Christian, the others would be Sunnis, the Shias, like that in Iraq also. Now, that is where you are always going to have a problem. But they wanted to sort of keep a representation of everyone, but that has not happened. Besides, there has always been these interventions by different countries. Lebanon also had gone through a major war, as you know, a civil war and all. But again, France is very much invested there. US is also invested there, and so is Saudis. And they are having terrible economic problems in the country. That is their major issue. Lebanese, if you know, are the most enterprising businessmen outside of Lebanon. They are doing amazingly well. But within Lebanon, there are these problems. But at the same time, there is a certain stability that has come very recently. Let's hope it goes on and they are able to tide over these financial crises, which leads to their political. They are so much interlinked with this kind of confession-based politics there. Iraq, until Iraq was this war by the US invasion, which I call it as the mother of all evils, basically, because they
Yes.
manufactured evidence to invade a country for their own geopolitical reasons, especially at a time when they had just gone in and what they did in Afghanistan against Taliban and gave Taliban back to Taliban, the power back to Taliban after years, and trillions of dollars investing and hundreds of thousands of soldiers dead. Same thing they did here. Now here, unfortunately, there was a very different kind of output that came out of this war. They virtually gave Iraq on a platter to Iran.
Iran. Yeah.
Today,
The
Iran is
Shia majority.
yes. There is a Shia majority. There are mullahs there. There are other elements, and there are various militant groups which are supported by Tehran. So they are also there, which Kataib Hezbollah and militia, Shia militia groups and all. So they are continuing to create problem. But the oil used to be the major arbiter for the interest of United States early days and until a few years ago. Now USA itself has emerged as a very major power in the oil, so it has become a competitor of these countries. Now we come to another very fascinating country, that is Tunisia, North Africa. I'm going there.
Yeah.
Now that's where the Arab Spring actually started.
Started. Yes.
That was a genuine problems that the ordinary people were facing. But there was a trigger that there's Hawker, Muhammad Azuzi. He was the one who was beaten up by a lady or something. Then the whole thing went out. And the French, who really were very close to them, being the erstwhile colonial powers, they thought it was a law and order situation. And they even wanted to send their people, but the events really hurled up so quickly, pent up problems of the Tunisians, that eventually Ben Ali had to run away within a very short time. And then it was started to Egypt. Again, we had seen Mubarak, his time, he's been there for so many years. But there we have seen the General Sisi, who had come back and has been a president for many years now. On the contrary, in the meantime, we had seen Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi, come there as a result of these protests in the country. Now, Egyptian economy has not been doing that well. So all these countries, which used to be big powers like Iraq, Egypt, and Syria, in the early days, are
Are
today
all
basically dependent a great deal on the Gulf powers, the oil-rich countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. So they are very much dependent on these countries. Then, of course, we can think of Egypt. I have already spoken about, and other important country is Turkey. It does not necessarily fall in this region, but it is
but
a
it
very big,
is, yeah,
yeah, because Turkey has a unique geographical position, a strategic location. Apart from being an Islamic country, it is also a NATO member country, and it is very close to Russia. Now, it has great ambitions of becoming a Islamic leader. So it used its muscle, and it is also militarily quite powerful country, and also lives in that Ottoman dream. Especially the current leader Erdogan, and so they were participating in all kinds of ventures, and then they realized that eventually in the last few years that the economy was not doing that well, so it could not have sustained the kind of momentum in the foreign policy they wanted, and therefore they immediately started making up with the Saudis, with the Emiratis, with the Egyptians, and Erdogan has been visiting all these countries and trying to work closely with them to a great extent. So I think that Turkey is a very important Mediterranean power. It is also an important country, but for us, the equation with Turkey has not been that great. And so we find then, of course, Oman and Kuwait are the other two GCC countries. Bahrain is the third one. And we have historic relations with all of them. 5,000 years, Dilmun civilization, Harappa, and, people were trading all the time through these routes. Then let me talk briefly about Jordan, sir.
yeah.
I
Jordan is
think-
important. It's central, and it
Yes,
plays a lot of games with everyone.
yes. Jordan is actually a buffer state between the Arabs and Israel, and it is one country. In 1994, it signed a peace treaty with Israel. Now, as you know, that in every war in 1967, basically that was the most defining war between Israel and the Arab states. And that's when the Arabs, the Israelis took away the West Bank, they took away Gaza, they took away Sinai, everything from these countries and defeating them definitely. Now, first time Jordan was took over a lot of Palestinians in the 60s and 70s into the country and gave them. But in 1970s, when Arafat was living there, he thought that the King Hussein was not giving him much support, and that's what he started an uprising against him. And in that uprising, basically, he tried to, dislodge King Hussein. But in that one, they were supported by General Ziaul Haq, who was a
Yes,
brigadier there with the training and about 300 odd soldiers that they had. And they all fought in the bunkers with them and eventually expelled Arafat from Jordan. But the population of Jordan today is about 60 to 65% is of Palestinian origin. And that is the thing, including the Queen Rania, she is also a Palestinian origin. So, and King himself is it's a very modern nation. It's a country with tremendous history for 10,000 years, continuous history. You can see that, and they King is himself also the custodian of the third mosque, which is Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem,
yeah,
and all the Christian sites as well as under the agreement that they had. And since then, but it's a small country with less resources. It depends a great deal on potash as well as on the tourism. These are the two important things. Its main revenue comes from there, apart from the remittances, because Jordanians are very smart people. So they are working all over the Middle East and banking and other sectors, sending a lot of remittances. But the country depends a great deal on the US, Saudi Arabia for the assistance, financial assistance as well. So its a strategic location is something that is main. There is a very big base of the Americans there. And in this war between Israel and Hamas, I learned that a lot of ammunition has been transferred from there to Israel. Even though the Jordanians won't want that, but the Americans are located on it, and they are also dependent on the Americans to a great deal. And that's why when Iran recently, that threw about 300 drones and missiles uh, over Israel, even Jordanians, along with the Americans, were able to
Yeah.
hold back a large number of them. So they are very much involved, but they are a major voice for a Palestinian state. Now, very often we have heard about the Jordanian option that let all these areas could be given to Jordan and but Jordanians, I don't think the establishment wants it because 60% themselves are quite a big to handle as far as they are concerned. So I don't think that's it. They are working for a two-state solution in the Palestine, and that's very important. And they continue to have good relations. I would say recently until this war, every time the war happens, they call back their ambassadors and then they talk through Americans or others like that. But the king is a very dynamic, and Abdullah too is the very dynamic leader, and he's respected a great deal. And Jordanians are very good fighters also, by the way, as soldiers. And I think that this is something it is a country which is of great significance and importance in many ways because of its strategic location. So I think that from our point of view also is very important. We tried to do during my tenure some more activities, got president to visit and all those things happened. But I think much more needs to be done, and I'm sure it's being done. I'm not aware about that. Then I think that the important countries I've talked about, there are many other smaller economies and countries that are there. But during this government's time, sir, I would like to say that this move towards having strategic partnership and relationships is very important. At the same time, we have tried to dehyphenate the relations with different countries. We have good relations with Iran, we have very good relations with Saudi Arabia, with the UAE, with other countries, Oman, Kuwait, and Bahrain, and all. But at the same time, we have strategic partnership with Israel, and we stand by Palestine and provide them all the support. So dehyphenation in that sense. Earlier, we used to have all visits. If any visit is taking place to Palestine, it has to be to Israel also after 92. If, like when I did the president's visit in Jordan, those he had to go Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. So we were trying to be like equidistant this time. Today,
Balance.
today the situation is we say very clearly that each relationship stands on its own, but our principal support for Palestine continues.
Right. So, can you throw some light on what's happening in Yemen internally? Because Houthis, we keep hearing of Houthis, and Houthis controlling the Red Sea channel. But there's a civil war going on in Yemen, and how does it affect Saudi Arabia still? Because ultimately that's going to play out. And after all, Yemen and the Houthis are connected to Iran and things like that.
Right. Actually, the genesis of the Houthis are one of the very I would say well-known fighters. It is not a ragtag militias.
Yeah.
They are very committed, and if you remember that even our Nizam of Hyderabad had about 100,000 Yemeni soldiers in his army, and they stayed back here, and we had about 100,000 Indians in Aden and other places who have been living in that part. So we have a very old connection. The port in Aden is very important for our outreach and others. And similarly, Socotra port is coming up now. So from India's point of view, it was always very good. Now what happened in Yemen is that this was like uh, there was something called Al Qaeda in Arabian Peninsula, which was on the border of the Saudi Arabia. They were ensconced there. But what was happening in the Washington also had a lot of impact here. Now, Saudi Arabia was in the US camp very much. They are the largest importer of the arms, ammunitions, everything from Washington, D.C. And when Obama administration wanted to have this nuclear deal with Iran, going soft on them, the Arab world, especially the Saudis, were feeling very miffed because they were not even part of the negotiations. Israelis were not happy about it at all. So they all wanted to derail this whole process. Now, in that point, they all knew that Houthis are actually supported by
Iran.
Iran, like the Hamas, like the Hezbollah, and they thought that we should try to remove the Houthis and take over this and install our own regime. So they did that. But the Houthis then went on to fight, and you'll be surprised that just because of the fighting skills, and on the one hand, we had about 27 Arab countries which were fighting against Houthis,
Houthis.
bombing them all through, and millions of people have been displaced or killed or others. But the Houthis, due to their precise strike missiles, their the drone attacks, they were able to even dislodge about 50% of the Saudi oil production in one day by the attacks.
Yeah,
And that's when the
2019 they attacked
yes,
Aramco at at Rubaik
yes,
and
Aramco
Al Quraysh.
facilities.
Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely. So that's when, and they even attacked up to Abu Dhabi. I mean, the one of the Indians died in that attack actually in Abu Dhabi. So this then the Saudis realized that it was an unwinnable war. They can pump in as much, they can bomb as much, but they were not going to win over this war. And that is when they started talking about, and Oman was the place where the Houthis were meeting and talking to them. Today, of course, as you know, that there is a installed government by the Saudis there, but at the same time, half of the country is controlled by the Houthis very much. And
Houthis.
today, Saudi Arabia and the Houthis, they have some kind of a ceasefire that is going on. Iran has agreed to control them, and the it has shown that militia, which you consider as ragtag, can prolong a war and may weaken you so much that you wouldn't know what to do. Israel is
What to
facing
do
the
there?
same problem today after 8 months being the most strongest army. So I think that
Yeah,
Houthis are now they are saying, I mean, and Israel, Saudi Arabia is then pumping in a lot of humanitarian supplies to them as well, because they also want these channels to remain open. And Houthi controls the Red Sea. Iranians, whether they listen to Iranians fully is also a big question.
yeah. So they're yeah, that's there. They have a quite an independent streak, and they've been fighting now Saudi Arabia for almost 10 years,
Yes.
and Saudi Arabia has been advised a lot by Pakistan with latest weapon systems and everything, and still they're buying it. Right. So you've given an overview of the whole thing. I have a couple of questions more.
Yeah.
First is, if you remember, say 3, 4, 5 years back, IS had a big footprint here. They hit North Syria, North, Iraq, part of up to Mosul, and they had almost had a separate country out there. What is the state of IS out there? Because obviously it's not there, but it must be there latent somewhere. And you see IS activity coming into Afghanistan. Will it get into Iran? And what's the future of this whole story? Because that's a destabilizing factor in all this.
Well, the ISIS actually is, as you know, started off in Iraq and Syria, basically, and they they set up their Islamic Emirate uh, in Raqqa and other places. And the whole Western forces, the Iranians, everybody else was fighting against them. And eventually, they thought that they had become victorious, and the ISIS is no longer there. This is what the Americans claimed. But in the process, we saw that they have been dispersed. They have moved into different countries. They don't have the same kind of which Baghdadi after he was dead, the same kind of a structure. But in Afghanistan, they are in a very big way present there. Islamic State of Khorasan province, as we call it, ISKP. But they had the capacity to hit up to Russia. And we saw that
Yeah, that attack,
attack which
Crocus.
happened. Yes. So this is they are still doing it, but they are also present in the region as well. They are not that they are doing these attacks here and there, but they are not so well organized. I read somewhere that they had even opened an office in India somewhere. I think so. This is the kind of things that they are trying to be present. And of course, as you know, sir, that all these terror organizations, they are far better connected than the normal states do,
Yes,
and they
they have
support
their
one
own links.
another. They support one another, and that's how they survive. Now they want to create an Islamic, whole Islamic world state for themselves in the world, or create it, and that's where they get into Pakistan. They get into different countries. Afghanistan is a very good terrain for them. Taliban doesn't like them, but within Afghanistan, if you see that Al Qaeda is present in nearly 15 provinces, the ISKP is present there, and Taliban itself is there. And all these fighters keep on moving whether they are Tajiks, the Uzbeks, or others, as well as the Pashtuns
Yeah.
and all, moving from one terror group to the another.
Other
And
groups.
it is like getting transferred in the
Yeah.
interim.
They're quite portable.
Yeah, it's an
Uh,
ideology, and this ideology is still surviving quite well.
okay. Now, the next thing which is of interest to many people in India is Pakistan is quite invested in the West Asia, and more so in Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and all these places. And uh, we keep hearing of Pakistan getting a lot of assurances that there'll be a lot of investment from these places into Pakistan, right? And Pakistan Army has been advising many countries there, and of course Saudi Arabia it has been advising in a big way. In fact, one of the chiefs is also even now sitting there.
That's Rahil
So,
Sharif.
Sharif. Now, in this setting, how do you see Pakistan continuing or money flowing from here to Pakistan?
Well, there are two things. Number one is that historically, Pakistan presented, and if you remember in the OIC, when it was formed in 1969, I would say, then General Yahya Khan had come there, and India was going to join the OIC, was invited to be a part of it in Morocco, in Rabat. And our delegation was led by, later became our president, Mr. Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad.
Fakhruddin Ahmad, yes.
Yeah, he led our delegation. And Yahya Khan basically went and told before the plenary, he went and told the Jordanian, the Saudi, and the Moroccan kings that if India becomes a member of the OIC, then I cannot return to my country. To that extent, he threatened them, and that's when I think the Moroccan king requested India to become an observer, which we declined, and our delegation returned from there. Now, since then, Pakistan is a member of the OIC, where we are not. And there are 57 countries after United Nations. That is the biggest
The biggest
grouping,
bloc.
Islam bloc of Islam. And that's where it had shown to the world that I'm an Islamic country. We are the biggest Islamic grouping. And at that time, of course, East Pakistan was also part of it. So both put together, it was a substantial numbers. And so they were alternating. They were providing them military. And as I mentioned about Jordan, what happened, they even the size for their horses are coming from Pakistan army, essentially. So they got involved in developing armies in these countries and tried to use from labor class to the highest class. They started working. India at that time had been very slow in uptake. Then they already, as I mentioned earlier, virtually gave up that okay, yeah, so they're all basically supporting Pakistan in that sense. And they were doing it. I mean, internationally, we saw it in the wars, we saw it. Secondly, all these countries were also part of the US led bloc during the Cold War. Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel, as well as Pakistan, they were all on the one side. So this is how it's working, whereas India was seen to be part of the other Soviet bloc in that sense. So Pakistan really put itself as a leader of a sort of a Islamic world or a partner in the Islamic system and tried to create its nuclear bomb when it came. They started
Yeah,
talking of Islamic bomb,
Islamic.
and those kind of things, so which gave these countries and their Pakistanis, I always say, is somehow have sir this uncanny ability to encash the nuisance value.
Uh-huh.
And they have done it with the Americans, the Russians, with the Chinese, with the Arabs, and everybody. But over time, and I would say since 2010, and I have seen it myself when we went to Saudi Arabia with the former Prime Minister, for the first time in the Riyadh Declaration, we had a mention of terrorism emanating from the region. And that's what gave them a scare that perhaps Saudi Arabia, which was their biggest benefactor, was moving away from there. And since then, more and more these countries have continued to realize that India is a much better, bigger, and better potential for us. And they also needed to branch off a little bit from the Western countries and go towards the markets and towards the countries where they can get better returns. And India is considered as a benign power, and the Indians who are working there, about 9.5 million, are seen as one of the most and best dedicated and disciplined force that have helped them in their own development in their countries. So I think that this is something that has eventually changed. But still, these countries, although they understand what the terrorism is emanating from this country, and as you know, some of these countries were also propagating the ultra Wahhabi groups and ultra religious groups, which were creating problems and developing these kinds of ideologies. So it all blended very well until about a few years ago, I would say a decade ago. But today, those countries are not letting Pakistan go under. That is for sure. But they are not actively seeking out Pakistan
Okay.
themselves. Pakistan is definitely trying to do that. Their armies, as you know, General Sharif was taken as, and he was the
Advisor.
head of this group, the 27 countries. But Pakistan also had its own issues when they asked the Pakistani army to join in their war. They refused because of the Shia and against Iran or anything. So because of their own populations. So I think that they have. But today, I mean, if I can say, and I can safely say, as per the evidence which is there, and evidence I will just give, that today Pakistan is no longer a factor in our relationship with the
With
Arab
all
world,
these countries. Yeah.
with all these countries. That is a
Okay.
fact. The reason is, you see Balakot, for example, when the Pulwama happened and Balakot happened, Article 370, these countries clearly said this. This is an internal matter of India. It would have never happened earlier. Except
Yeah.
Turkey, or most countries have agreed to that. That's a great change.
Yeah. And fine. Do you think these countries will? I mean, they might bail out Pakistan once in a while, but do you think they'll go
Yeah.
and invest in Pakistan?
Well, I think that there are certain investments which are there. Karachi Port, for example, DP World is investing there. In Gwadar Port, Saudi Arabia has said that they are ready to invest in a refinery in about $10 billion. Now, we need to also understand that now China is also a bigger factor.
Yeah, I was
You
coming
know,
to China, but you
most-
got it.
yeah,
You might as well
yeah.
we'll discuss about them also.
China is very much, very well entrenched in this region completely. And Pakistan and China, treat now Pakistan as sort of a state of China.
China.
So they CPEC or whatever it is. So Gwadar port today may not be a commercial port, but it is definitely a naval port, and it is where they were thinking that somehow with the Saudi oil and other things could flow here. Pakistan also was interested in the Chabahar port like China. So I think that this is something they are investing, but they are not like very avidly looking towards it because they see China as a difficult, going through a very difficult phase. So, but at the same time, I think that my understanding is they would not let Pakistan sink.
Okay. So, how do you see the Chinese footprint here, and how do you think that will progress? Because that will be at cross purposes, not only to our interests, also to Western interests.
Well, sir, whether we like it or not, China
It's there.
is a major player there in the region. The BRI, all the countries in the region are part of the BRI. And China also follows very similar policy in the sense that it's a non-prescriptive, non-interventionist foreign policy in the region. And since they became part of the BRI, the Chinese have gradually been from Tehran to Tel Aviv everywhere. They have nearly investments in all the major ports in the region, which is their, strategy going forward. Not exactly like the Americans do, but they are going in a very different way. So under the radar, they have today strategic partnerships with about 12 countries in the region, and 21 countries in the region out of 22 are basically the members of the BRIs, which is working very closely. Now, in the changing environment, I don't see them being a sort of a security provider in the traditional sense of the term, replacing US, but they they are very much there. They're part of everything that happens there. They try to show there in a benign way. Now they are trying to get into more into soft power as well. 21 Confucius centers are working overtime there. The language, I was just reading somewhere that about 600 schools are teaching Chinese languages. in the country. So they are very close in their own country. Uyghur issue, for example, the whole world talks about it, but none of these countries talk about it at all. They think it's an internal matter of China. So that is a kind of a. Besides, China is the largest importer of the oil. Saudi Arabia is its biggest partner in the region. It has very good relationship with Iran also and has bailed it out during this period of US sanctions. So we are seeing that China, Iran, Russia, and North Korea collaborating far more today than it was earlier. But on the other hand, China is smart enough not to burn its boats with the Arab countries. So it's very much invested. Its relationship with Saudi Arabia is the most expensive relationship, and with the UAE is the most intensive relationship. So I think that what we are seeing in Egypt, for example, the new Suez Canal project which is happening, China is very much there. So they are part of every major infrastructural development project. Saudi Arabia NEOM, which is an iconic project, the Chinese are very much part of it. So today Chinese are at a very different level, and they are going to be an issue for us. And I say always the why this region, if this region is so important to us, we would need to be able to craft strategies that are going to help us in the long run to serve our own interests without any interruption.
Yeah, I think, sir, we have covered the whole area very in a detailed manner, and your knowledge of this area was very clear. Today, something funny has happened. For some reason, my channel is on red alert. I mean, it's not going live. But
No
since I
problem.
had made it, no, that's okay. We'll get the questions. But General Dushyant Singh had tied up with clause, and he's put up a question because we've not. I will.
Well, he's a dear friend. So,
Yeah. So he says ISIS is an idea in which radical Islamists affiliate themselves. Of course, the mother organization was carved out of AQ in Iraq. Its demise started when ISIS started taking the form of a state. And once they become a state, they were visible and defeated in a conventional war. Hence, they have reverted back to old ways, hidden in small groups spread all over. So, this is his comment. You have anything to say, you could add,
well,
and
I
then,
think I think this is a very apt comment, and that is the strategy they have followed, because they realized that it was the might of all the major powers, including Iran and others in the region, which were fighting against them, and so it was difficult for them to fight. But this is an ideological also organization, and this idea is something that survived this, and there are now spread around in much larger geography in smaller groups, but they come around together whenever it is because they use technology better than us, the normal states. And so I think the General Dushyant is absolutely right.
right. So, with this, sir, I finished for the evening. Since we don't have questions from others, what I'm going to do with this video is immediately after we finish, I'm going to download it and upload it back into YouTube. There's a method. So after half an hour to 1 hour, you'll go live on YouTube. Right?
Thank you.
It's not that the whole thing is not. It doesn't go tough. Right. Only thing is we've not been able to go through live. I see some problem. I tried to rectify it. I couldn't.
No, no, it's
With
okay.
this, I thank you a lot because the kind of exposure you've given on West Asia and the scan you've given is great. I do wish that your book is well prescribed to and well sold. And if
I
is
hope
there
people
any
like it.
target? Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's very nice, and that's a great thing. I'll request. In fact, I would suggest all those of us who are actually attempting for staff college and other entrance exams take this book, because the thing about essays is I'm sure they are related to various points of time, and it's not a you'll get consolidated issues on various facets of West Asia which you probably might not get in a book. That's what I find fascinating about a collection of articles, because they give you various facets with time, incident based, and they cover all countries, right? So this will be very useful for those of you who want to get a deeper perspective of West Asia and those who are preparing for competitive exams. With this, sir, thank
Thank,
you. Good
thank
evening
you so
and
much.
Jai Hind to you,